So now I have a new device in the middle. So a couple of days ago, I was talking to some colleagues in the kitchen in the office, and they were asking me, so what, oh, thank you. So what are you going to talk about on Thursday? And when I said, I'm going to talk about how we can change the world, I noticed that their eyebrows raised slightly. But to address climate change, that is really what we need to do. We need to fundamentally change the way we structure our societies and our economies. We need to make development sustainable, and we have very little time left to get on the right track. This is basically what science tells us. That's the challenge we're facing. And one of the key questions for us as researchers is, of course, what is our role in this? How can we contribute to change? And how can we become better at and ensure that we actually make a difference? And that is what I want to talk to you about today. I basically haven't brought a lot of fancy slides or video clips. I simply want to share one observation and two stories with you. And the observation is really what I would call a call for cautious optimism. And the two stories about what we do at UNEP DTU partnership to contribute to change, to contribute to a world of no carbon and climate resilient societies and communities, and how we try to contribute to that by doing things slightly differently. But let's start with the call for cautious optimism. If we look back over the past 2 decades, we have made a lot of progress and we have initiated a lot of change, and it's important to keep that in mind in the midst of all the more depressing details that we're faced with. So we're basically making progress in 3 areas that are essential to initiate change. First of all, we've greatly increased our knowledge about the problem of climate change. We've also identified solutions in many areas that can help us address this problem. And now we're really focusing on and moving into how we can put those solutions into practice. And that's where the focus is, politically and academically. And it's also where, as they say, the rubber meets the road. Because obviously we're not doing enough, and we're not doing it at the scale and the pace that is required to address the challenge. But it's important to keep in mind that we are doing things, that things are happening. And just to give you a few examples, in 2015, every single day of that year, 500,000 new solar PV systems were installed. We've seen double-digit growth rates in renewables, in wind and in solar PV for the past 12 years, every single year in a row. We see that investments in renewables are surpassing investments in fossil fuels. And we've seen for 3 years in a row now that for the first time ever in a period with positive economic growth rates, CO2 emissions have stalled. So that's telling us that change is happening and that we really are doing something. The good news is also that the studies available really tell us that if we manage to put these solutions into practice fast enough and widely enough, we will be able to get on the right track to keeping global temperature increase to below 2 degrees. So that brings me back to what our role is as researchers in this and how we can contribute to change. And I think one of the key messages coming out of journal papers, science, and of calls from political actors is that it's not so much a question about doing different things, but it's more a question about doing things differently. And I want to share 2 stories about what we do at UNEP DTU partnership to do things differently and how we try to do it differently. And the first story I want to share with you is about our work with the UN Environment Emissions Gap reports. And these reports aim at informing and providing policy-relevant information that can feed into the discussions and negotiations under the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. What our role in this, it's actually quite multidimensional. We help frame the content of these reports in addition to making sure that the whole process runs smoothly. We also contribute as lead authors and as contributing authors we draft the executive summary, and we help in contributing to getting to the outreach and communication of the report findings. So I wanted to share with you this picture that's taken at the Climate Change Conference in 2015 in Paris, where years of hard negotiations culminated in the adoption of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, which was unanimously adopted by all parties to the convention. And if you look at the picture, you can see how happy and relieved and almost victorious people look. And that is quite a contrast to this photo that was taken at another climate change conference some years before in Copenhagen. And that went down in history mostly as for not being so successful in sealing a global deal on climate change. But nevertheless, that's where the story about the UNEP emissions gap report starts. The conference was not successful in bringing about a global deal on climate change, but it was, or did amount to, and result in what's called the Copenhagen Accord. And that's the first time countries started to put forward pledges for their reduction of emissions. And based on that, a central question arose. Are these pledges sufficient to get us on track to keeping global warming to 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees? Obviously, the answer so far has been no. But that question is really what is central for the emissions gap reports and has been ever since. And it's also a good example of a beautiful way of condensing a lot of extremely complex information from science, from other research in social sciences and data into a very simple message and into, if not one, then at least few numbers. And I just want to show you what the gap figure from our last report looks like. Obviously, we also look at other issues in these reports. We look at, since we are not on the right track, can we bridge the gap? And if so, how do we do it? We include new topics every year that are crucial to inform the negotiations. So this is clearly not an example of doing different things. We're still saving the world one report at a time. But it is an example of how we try to do things differently. And much relies on the setup. And this report has really proven to be hugely successful in terms of reaching out, in terms of maximizing the impact and uptake of our messages as researchers. Why has it been successful in doing that? There are a number of factors influencing this, but one is obviously the setup. Since we're doing this together with UNEP, it allows us to reach a much larger audience. We also have a setup with a steering committee where we're closely engaging with the UNFCCC and also with the IPCC, and they're all very active, and it helps us improve the relevance of the report. The setup is also that it's an assessment report, so it actually builds on published studies, and we bring in authors from all around the world who are well-renowned in their fields. So those are some of the reasons, and just to give you an indication that it actually is resulting, or do have really good results in terms of raising awareness and creating attention. Last year when we published the report, it created, I think in the first 2 weeks, nearly 5,000 media articles were produced, and that meant it made it the most cited report on climate change last year. We also see that almost all negotiators in these climate change conferences make reference to the report. And it's not only during the conferences and in the negotiations. We have a huge impact in terms of number of references to the report and its findings in the peer-reviewed literature. So these are some of the reasons why it's worth doing it, even if it's quite a hassle at points in time as well. The second story I want to share with you is very different, and it's about adaptation. And it's really about, it's one of 14 activities that we're currently implementing as part of a project that we call at Maya. And that Maya has a very different approach compared to most other projects. It's basically looking at how can we initiate change And how can we engage private sector in addressing adaptation and mitigation on the ground in different countries? So it's moving away from a closed circle project approach where we identify something, we involve some stakeholders, we produce some reports and some journal papers, and then we try to make some kind of outreach. This is really about setting in motion a process that continues after we leave. We want to set up a framework, we want to identify sustainable business models that can really take off after we have completed our interventions. Now, the example in Ghana is about how we can help farmers improve their livelihoods in agriculture. So agriculture in Ghana is characterized by a lot of small farmers, mainly family-run farms. And these farmers often get their knowledge about agricultural production practices and techniques from their parents rather than through formal education. We also see that many of the farmers are literate, and there are many local languages spoken. Furthermore, current agricultural extension services are insufficient or inadequate. So those were some of the challenges that we're facing in reaching out and in improving the livelihoods of these farmers. And we were contacted or requested by this local not-for-profit company called Voter Mobile to use a simple technology that's available to most farmers, and that's mobile phones, to provide up-to-date regular services informing them about meteorological issues and agronomical issues and market prices to help boost their yields and to help make their livelihoods more sustainable. A lot of these farmers already experience the impacts of climate change through rising temperatures, droughts, pests, and changes in precipitation. The first results of this, and we're still gathering the information, show that it's actually successful. It actually does increase the incomes of these farmers. It does help them prepare for extreme weather events and so forth. And it's really nice to see as a researcher that you can contribute to making a change on the ground. And this whole approach of Admire is something that we hope to build on, expand, and develop further in the years to come. So that was really the second story I wanted to share with you about how we try to do things slightly differently to increase our impact and to increase the effects of what we do. And I want to end with a call for action. I once heard this really good description or mental image really about how we in academia often seem to stand on one side of a huge tall wall and we keep throwing over our brilliant findings, our reports and our journal papers on the other side of the wall where the people that we're really trying to reach are standing, and in the hopes that some of them will pick it up. Well, I think the pile is growing, and I think it's time that we try to punch a hole through that wall. So I want to dare us all. No matter whether we're saving the world one report or one journal paper at a time, or whether we're designing new research and new projects, to think about whether we can do things slightly differently, to increase our contribution to change, to accelerate that change, and really to help ensure that what we do is to the greatest possible benefit to society. Thank you.